continue. And before I get started on the talk and what I'm going to say about the land and the land that I own, the land that I work on, and the land that has raised me in many ways, I just want to say one thing, and that is that there's someone who's not at this talk tonight, and who I've had some fantastic conversations with, and that I've welcomed the opportunity to discuss things and to talk about some quite serious topics. And so I just want to offer a drink to Andrew.
Andrew, yes.
And
yes. To Andrew.
To Andrew. Okay, so why am I here? It's quite a serious question. I'm here, I suppose, to share a little bit of what I've learned and what the land has taught me and what the land means to me and what it's capable of offering and what it perhaps means to some of the people here. There's a lot of people here who've dedicated their lives to working the soil, to what it can offer and to what it can bring forth. And so just to explain and ask a few questions, whilst this is down as a talk, I'm hoping that perhaps it becomes more of a discussion in some ways, and that we can, there is room for questions and for it not just to be all one way. And I think on a more fundamental level, if I think about why am I here, and it's a question that I've sort of put to myself over quite a long period of time. And I'll tell a little bit more of the story later, but I questioned a lot of things, and it was actually losing someone quite close to me that forced this questioning and forced me to examine why I was doing what I was doing, and to start again in many ways and go back to, what am I doing? What is meaningful enough that I want to actually spend time doing it? Okay. How did I get here? I don't know. I think, well, tonight I drove here. It's fairly simple. It's a fairly simple definition of that. And it's not always a given. I think there was a period when I sort of eschewed those kinds of options and looked at what other ways are there of travelling, what ways do I want to engage with my environment, what ways do I want to see the world, and what's appropriate when it comes to that. But there's then a period of reflection that comes, what is not just from my own perspective, but also what is practical, and what can I do with the time that I've been given? Is it just to spend all my time getting somewhere, or is there something that I actually want to do along the way? And after addressing that question, we look at what do I do now that I'm here? And there's many things that we can do with our time. There's many things that I was doing with my time that I no longer do. There are things that I've stopped doing that I've gone back to doing, and things which I wasn't doing which I've started. And I think there's a lot to be said for taking the time to examine that. And I recognise that I'm fortunate to have had the opportunity to examine those and to reflect upon why I'm doing some of the things that I'm doing and whether it's actually worthwhile. But I'll start with the story, or a little bit of the story, because it starts when I'm this big. Okay. And you cut that bit out. As I mentioned, I lost someone quite close to me, my grandfather, and I used to do something very different to what I do now. And I used to work for a property company and a family business, and I had my grandfather who worked with me while I was doing that. And he worked for the company into his 90s. He still came into the office every day till he was 93. And he would spend most of the time asleep at that point. And occasionally would wake up and someone would make him a cup of tea and he'd go to bed sleeping. But when he woke up, he had a smile on his face and he was quite happy about being there and about seeing me, I think, involved with it. And I remember the last time that I saw him alive, and I went to hospital to see him, and he was sort of in and out of consciousness at that point, and spending most of his time sleeping or resting. And he recognised me, and he asked me how work was going. And he didn't just say, "How's work going?" He asked me specific questions about things that we'd been dealing with when he was last in the office. And he was, I forget how long he had to live at that point, but he cared that much about the work that that was what he wanted to talk about, and that was what was important to him. And it blew me away. It just made me question everything. It just said, can I realistically look at myself and say that it means as much to him, as much to me, as it did to him? And I couldn't say that I could. And I'm either, in some ways, I'm either all into something, or I'm just not interested. And I wasn't as interested as he was, so I thought, okay, I'm just going to stop. I can't keep dipping my toe in this, because I'm not as involved in it as he was. And so I stopped. I stepped away from it, and I stepped away from a lot of things. I stepped away from my family. I think I questioned at that point whether or not, because I worked with my brother, I worked with my father, and they were co-workers, they were friends, they were family, they were relations, and I couldn't at the time untangle all of the different elements. And so I had to work out what could I rebuild at that point. And I wanted somewhere to do it. And at the time I was looking also for somewhere to spend more time, to live, and something to put my life to. If I wasn't going to do what I was doing before, what can I actually do with my time? And so I looked and I thought, okay, where do I belong? What places have been part of my life? What places have I known? Where have I been? Where have I spent time? And there's this bit of land in Taplow, next to where beer comes from. And in this land, it used to belong to the same grandfather who I lost. And so I went back there, and it's where my father was born. It's 100 yards from where my mother was born, and that's how I came to be, is they lived in the same world. And so I went back there, and land doesn't just, well, left to its own devices, land goes in a particular direction. And I feel that in some places that's appropriate, in some circumstances you can just leave it to do its own thing. But this place I don't feel is like that. I think there are other opportunities for what it can contribute, other things that can happen there other than just it being left. So I started to go back, and I started to do a few bits and pieces there and spend a little bit more time slowly trying to figure out what that place held and where it was going to go. And so I thought about my family, I thought about the people who've gone before me, and when my grandfather first bought that land, as you enter the field, a few people here have been to visit, and when you enter the field, you can see there's 3 oak trees, quite mature oak trees on the far side of the field, and then there's 3 more that run along the footpath on the northeastern corner. And in the middle of the oak tree, when my family first came there, in the middle of the field, there was a stump of an old oak. And when I was born, an acorn was planted at the foot of the stump. And now, the stump has gone, but a smaller oak tree stands in its place, and the tree has grown as I have grown. So there's a part of me, I guess, that will always kind of be there and always be part of that land. And then I look around, I look at who are the other people that are a part of my life, and there are lots of people that were a part of my life who perhaps were there just because they were geographically close to me, or because it was convenient for them to be a part of my life, or I don't know, lots of other not particularly substantial reasons. So I started to address that and think about, who do I actually want to spend time with? Who are the people that are really important to me? Who actually matters? And that is the beginnings of a community. It's the beginnings of something which I think is fairly fundamental to our existence. It's something that's particularly strong here. And I'm grateful and fortunate that I've had the opportunity to form a small part of it in some small ways. And there is something, as I say, there's a tree there, so there's something that roots me to that land. But I think outside of that, speaking more broadly, there's also something deep within us, perhaps, that is at home when we're in touch with the land. Whatever land that is, wherever it is, whatever we do with it, the further we are from it, the more separated we are from everything it brings, we feel a friction, or at least I know I felt one. And it was the denial of that that led me to put up with what I was doing before for so long. And I think it was aware to a lot of the people around me were aware long before I was, that it was having quite a significant impact on me as a person and on my existence. And it's a little different now. But this also brings another question with it, and it's a question that is being examined here in quite a particular way, and quite an exciting way in many respects. And that is, well, if you want to have access to land, how do we go about that? What are the opportunities? And that, I think, is a whole separate topic, and it's something which I perhaps am not as well qualified as many others to talk about. So we'll leave it there, other than to say that the land has passed to me, and I've got a question to ask myself about what happens after I'm gone. And it's a very real question to ask, and perhaps it's informed by what other people are doing and the questions they're asking. So when I went back, I had to think, well, it's not just me. And when I start spending more time there and doing more things, what impacts do what I'm doing have on the people around me? And it's thinking about those who have been there before I arrived, those who were there long before I was even thought of, and also that which will sustain itself long after I'm gone, and after the effects of what I've done have gone as well. So to think of it in those terms, and to ask the question of who else is here, and it's the local people, many of you who know of my family or know of me, and who have a vested interest in an aspect of the land, even if it's just that's what they see when they look out their window, and they perhaps enjoy that sight. So to be considerate of that in some ways. There's also more organised structures, and in terms of the locals, the people who brew this beer, the immediate neighbours, Margie and Id, they actually offered, when I first started doing more work there, to host some public consultation evenings, I guess you could call them, very formally, where we sat around and had a drink and people asked me questions. But yeah, public consultation sounds more impressive. So yeah, they just invited everyone from the local area to come along, and if they didn't know who I was, meet me and understand where I was coming from, what I was doing and why I was there, and to raise any concerns. And it's something that I will go back to as I start the process of formally applying for permission to live there and to build my own house, to try and take those opinions on board. And not to say that every opinion is necessarily going to drastically alter what I do, but I think it's worth understanding where people are coming from and what their feelings are, and to understand that people have very real concerns, and also that I have something to learn, that I don't know necessarily the impacts of what I'm doing and I don't know how it might adversely affect people, or even how people are concerned that it might affect them. So to talk to them about that. And I think lumped under very grandiose term of beings, I think there's also all the other creatures that call it home already, everything else that already lives there and that I can potentially displace through my actions or destroy or adversely affect in whatever way. And the life beyond that, just the very force within the ground which brings forth everything which thrives there. So to think about all of these parties, because in some ways they have as much of a say as I do. I'm not looking to come here and impose my will and just say, this is how I want it to be. I can't do that. I can't actually just tell the land what I want and have it give me what I want. I have to listen as well. So where do I start? I start at the beginning. And as I said before, I stopped what I was doing previously. I didn't really have anything that I had to do. I didn't have anywhere I had to be. I didn't have anyone I had to see. And from my perspective, I cast off a lot of the responsibilities. And perhaps they were unseen to me at that point, and I think it was, well, I know it was particularly hard for those close to me to deal with that as a decision. And I looked at it naively at that point from my own perspective and said, okay, how does this affect me? But relationships are a two-way thing. And to think, well, I can cut myself off, but someone else might still be interested. So to start to rebuild those. But in terms of what I do with my time, I have to address the fundamental needs. I had lots of things that I was doing that I didn't agree with, lots of frameworks that I was working within that I didn't understand, and lots of questions that I didn't have good answers to. So I decided to strip all of that away as much as possible and to start with, okay, if I do nothing, what comes up inside me as something which I need to do? So food is a fairly fundamental one. You get hungry and you can fast for a while, a few days, probably quite a considerable period of time. But you get more done if you eat. And so that's the first thing, food. And it raises lots of other questions though, because there are lots of things masquerading as food, and there are things which are actually, I would say, closer to food. So it's a decision about, do I grow my own food? Do I try and meet all of my own needs? Having started a little bit down that path, it quickly reveals itself to be impossible. And there's a reason for community, there's a reason for all of those other things that spring up, is because you can't do it all yourself. No man is an island. And so I have to provide my food. I have to think about where am I going to go, what am I going to buy, how is that being grown? If it doesn't come from my land, it comes from someone else's, and the decisions they make about how they grow their food affect their soil and their livelihood and their life as well. It's an exchange, even if it's money for food, which in some ways seems like it's unfair, but it's thinking about the impact of those actions at a distance. And the same when it comes to shelter. How do I keep myself dry when it rains? How do I keep myself warm? And what do I do beyond the old agricultural barn that was there before, that I propped up, put some tarpaulins over the top and started storing stuff in? It's not a long-term solution, and things have changed and progressed a little beyond that now. But it's thinking about that, and longer term, even what I've got now isn't permanent, which is why there's a process to go through in applying for permission to be there, and to be able to live there in something which qualifies as a dwelling. There's clothing as well, and again, more questions. It's more comfortable if you wear clothes some of the time. So where do they come from? What materials are they made out of? What impacts do they have upon people, the people who make them, the people who make the products that make them, if they don't follow the whole thing through from start to finish? And these are all questions that I put to myself, because even if you don't ask the questions, you still answer them in a way with every choice that you make, every choice that we make. Every decision has ramifications. And for me, it was just a question of what happens if I consciously try and address those and try and understand whose lives I'm affecting, how I'm affecting it, what I'm doing with what repercussions are happening as a result of me just being here. And recognizing I couldn't do everything myself, what other people am I going to start to join into that network of what I'm doing to meet these needs that I've identified? Is it just purely mercenary? Am I only involved because I want something off of them? And I suppose they want something off of me, so we exchange and go our separate ways. Or is there more to it than that? And at that point, it becomes a question of knowledge. What do we learn from each other along the way? Is it just that I've got some beetroot and he's willing to give me £2? Fine. We've learned something, the value of beetroot. But I'm not saying beetroot's £2. Sonny's going to correct me at this one. It'd be a terrible thing. But yeah, it's these things which come about even when you just do the most menial of things. There's some knowledge, some expertise which is needed to do these things. And people have figured it out in the past, which is fortunate. You don't have to start again from scratch every time. But how does that get brought forward, and what gets brought forward, and what gets forgotten? What do I want to carry on, and what do I think can be left behind? So I set myself a few rules. And I said, okay. To start with, I thought, I'm not going to buy anything that's got more than one ingredient. Because then, food-wise. And then I know, if I'm buying it from the person that produces it, I know the direct impact of where it's going. The more complex the item, the more complex that gets to follow through. So we'll start. Only things with one ingredient. And you learn about cooking that way as well, which I think is a fascinating invention. So there's lots of rules like this. One example. But I think, and I distinguish here between rules and laws. I think rules are the things that are useful to us and that we can kind of put together. Laws are the things that we don't have any choice in. And I don't mean law as in legal law. I mean law like time and things which are immutable and non-negotiable. Rules exist within games we can choose to play or not play, we can construct according to the ends that we're searching for or not. Laws affect us regardless. And doing this, it's also a test of my own limits. And I mentioned previously, I recognise I can't do everything myself. But it's also even within what I choose to do myself, where are the edges? Where is this is possible, this is not possible, this builds me up, this breaks me down. Trying not to find myself back where I was before, doing things without questioning them and just continuing down that spiral before it ends up in a terrible place. And again, to come back to the reasons, am I still doing this because I want to do it? Am I still doing this with a good justification for doing it? Or have I become complacent? And so to inform this process, and also to inform the future of what I do with the land where I am, I think about, well, I could just sit and think, but there's a lot of information out there to be garnered from looking and from observing what's around us. And well, a still man might know a busy man better than he knows himself if he just sits and watches. So I thought, I'll just sit and watch. I'll just sit and watch for a year. And I'll see what it has to offer every day throughout that year. And I'll see what it has to offer at every time throughout every day. And obviously I missed a few bits. I did some sleeping and I wasn't there the whole time, so there are some gaps, but it informs me as much as I feel is reasonable. And yeah, every year is going to be different as well. But it's a starting point, and it shows me a little of what's already on the land, of what's here, so I can look around. I can see trees, I can see creatures, I can see the effects of the weather. What's not here? And it's a little bit harder to spot something by its absence. But I'm not only looking at my own system. I've got other people who are doing similar things and asking similar questions. And I can examine the land where they are and look at what they're doing, why they're doing it, what questions they're asking, and then compare, come back. Okay, that's not here. And not to say that everything is appropriate everywhere and that you're going to be able to fit everything in, but if there's some glaring holes, then maybe you might be able to fill them. And what happens here? And part of that's me, part of that's what do I do with my time, but part of that's also what happens of its own accord regardless of my input. The last question's harder, and in some ways more dangerous, I think. And it challenges me because it's easier to assume that I know what's going on and I know why it's happening. But to accept that I don't understand something requires some difficult reflection. And to think, yeah, I can see some things of what's happening and some things of what's going on, but do I really know, or am I just guessing? And yeah, I have to come up with a workable hypothesis in order to travel forward. I can't keep endlessly examining it. But it's also accepting there are going to be things that I don't know. There are going to be things which remain unknown. But I can inform myself a little bit more. I can talk to other people are doing similar things, and other people who have asked some of these questions and have come up with answers of their own, and I can look at where they started and why they're doing it and what I feel is useful that I can then take away. So I started to talk to a few people, some people who had managed land similar to my land, who had started in places that I'd started and looked to adapt from what they found in front of them, looked to live within that natural world and to try and interact with it in a mutually beneficial way as far as they were able to. And on different scales, individuals, communities, people coming at it from different angles, who came at it because they wanted to make things from timber, or grow things, or brew things, or spin things, or weave things, or teach other people. People who came at it for different reasons. And when I looked at what they're doing, look at it, trying to approach it from a principled perspective. I'm not looking to, well, even if I could, I can't. Even if I tried, I couldn't just copy what someone else is doing. It's always going to be through my own filter. But understand why they're doing those things. Are they just looking for what's immediate, or are they looking for something more permanent? Is it just, what do I need to do today? Okay, I need shelter, I need to feed myself. I'll eat whatever's closest to hand, and I'll use whatever materials are most expedient. Or can I do a bit better? Do other people look at it in that way? Or do they see something a little bit different? And what about their purpose of being there? Are they there just to meet their own needs? Are they there because they want to contribute something to other people? Are they there to ask fundamental questions of themselves, or contribute something to something greater? To look at them also as individuals, and not just automatons who are repeating the same action. And it requires an examination of my own personality as well. There's an element of, what do I want to do with my time? What motivates me? But also an element of, what am I best placed to contribute? There are certain things which I've found that I definitely don't want to do. And so there's certainly some mileage in forcing myself to do those things occasionally. But having experienced what happens when I take that to the extreme, then perhaps to be a little bit more reflective upon it. The practicality things was a hard lesson for me. I suppose the foolishness of trying to attempt perfectly consistent conduct in a world comprised almost entirely of compromises only became apparent after a lot of trying and failing. And so now I have to moderate the aspirations in some way and say, okay, I can't do it exactly that way. What's close? And then working with other people, so allowing some contribution and not wanting to keep it all to myself. When I first started spending some time there, I'd found myself in a world that I didn't really understand and that did a lot of things which I didn't necessarily agree with. And perhaps I presupposed a lot of reasons for the way people behaved in the way they behaved. But having withdrawn myself entirely from that, and then realizing that I couldn't just do that on my own, it was reconnecting with the other aspects of a wider society, and recognizing that I can form some links with that actually form a beneficial partnership. So looking at what, addressing a little bit more of the why, there are skills, as I mentioned before, things which people feel are worth holding on to, and that have a place in both their practical uses and applications, but also with the connection that they enable us to form with the land that surrounds us. And one of the rules that I made for myself, and that I still try to follow as much as possible, is that there will be no fossil fuel input and no machinery involved in anything that I do. And perhaps that's a longer term view. I think it's not just looking at it from an environmental standpoint. It's perhaps a little bit more selfishly about the interaction with the world that such an approach gives, and understanding the work involved with doing something, without just accepting that I can push this tree out of the way. If I stand there with an axe, it becomes a different question. It's a lot more work. Well, actually, it's the same amount of work, but my perception and appreciation of that work, I think, is drastically altered. So there's those skills. Building the structures that I built by hand, making all the tiles one by one. Is this worthwhile? Can I keep this up? I'm still going at the moment. And the ability to share. The very fact that I could go and talk to other people meant that they weren't just keeping what they were doing to themselves. They wanted to involve other people in what they were doing. So to think about that as well with what I do, to share it, but to try and share it considerately. Not to just share it because I think it ought to be shared, but if people are interested, then to respond. To say, well, if you want to come and see, come and see. But if no one's asking, I'm not going to try and force it on people. And if no one's asking, there's probably actually a reflection of myself and what I'm doing. If no one's interested, there's probably no value in what I'm doing. So maybe I ought to change my ideas. And the soul of it as well. The thing that gives meaning and makes something sustainable. What makes a lifetime's work out of it. The tree's there. With any luck it will live as long as I will. It'll probably live a lot longer. So there's a part of me in some ways still there that will be there for the rest of my life. But I can't just sustain myself as the tree does. I'd like to die like a tree, just to be buried where my roots have always sat. But in the meantime, there's other things to do. So I have to think about what I'm going to do and why I'm going to do it. How do I occupy my days? What will I become? And there's danger in that, because as soon as I decide to do something, I have to say no to everything else. And whilst I sit in the pleasant fog of indecision, I can't fail. But there's also promise in aiming for something. And even if you miss, then you try again with a little bit more information. And I look at what's gone before. It's not a blank canvas, I don't start with nothing. There's things that are already there. So to address those and see how they can be used to meet my needs in the present moment, but also what I can leave behind, the things that which will endure beyond my own lifespan, and go forward into the future. Am I compromising the ability for future generations to meet their own needs, or am I actively contributing to strengthening that? And these are things, I suppose, which are placed upon me rather than that I place upon the land. The land is everything. It's food, it's shelter, it's clothing, it's medicine, it's a grave. It does it all. But it asks something in return. So, how do I meet that question? How do I take care of it? And what will become of me? Where did I start? How did I get here? What am I going to leave behind when I go? And what do I do in between the two? I've got some answers to some of these questions, but the rest is just waking up and seeing what's in front of me and coming to it day after day. What am I going to do today? How does the day find me? Just revealing a little bit of that path, one step at a time. And given that this is what's in front of me, how do I start right now? Better perhaps to build a house of sticks than just have a pile of stones. So I started building a house of sticks. But that's as far as I've got. Thank you. Any questions?
Are you in a floodplain?
Yes.
Ooh.
Everything is built up off the ground, correspondingly. When we had a very wet winter last winter, there's an oak tree which stands behind the cabin that I built. And it stands there because there's a limb which came out, and we raised the frames by throwing a line over the limb and winching the frames into position, and then it's oriented for the passage of the sun as well. But the water got to the bottom of that oak tree last year, which was a little concerning.
I was just trying to imagine all.
Yeah, there is a lot of water around, but everything, all of the work from that perspective is on the highest portion of the site for that reason, and then built up off of the ground correspondingly. It does, however, inform the decisions about what I do with the rest of the land. Willow grows especially well there, which is fantastic, but the woodland is also potentially inaccessible in 2 months of the cutting season. So just to bear that in mind, and learn how to build coracles. This is the other.
If it's inaccessible to you, there's pretty a lot of wildlife that's inaccessible to you, which enjoys being in there. Sort of the benefits.
Oh, for sure.
Accessibility to humans.
Yeah.
Does allow all the stuff just to do its
Absolutely, and it is the fact that it does contribute that there is a wetland habitat and a temporally limited wetland habitat as well means that there are fantastic opportunities, and to tread lightly accordingly and recognise what's there, and that sometimes things absolutely do benefit from me not being there.
Sorry, how much land have you got? It doesn't abut the river, does it?
It doesn't. It abuts the Jubilee River, if you know Taplow.
Okay.
So the Jubilee River bounds it on 2 sides, and there's a public footpath along the other edge. And I'm looking to try and open up the boundary between the Jubilee River and the land as much as possible to allow the flow of life between the two, because it's fantastic. The river itself is quite a wonderful wildlife corridor, and so the total site is 12.5 acres, and it's a mixture of lots of different things. There's the woodland there, there's some grassland, there's some historical arable cultivation, there's some various areas of scrub and everything in between. So I think for me that's one of the real strengths of it, and it's something that I will try to continue to encourage, is the fact that it is so diverse and that it's not overly reliant on one particular characteristic. It's lots of different things to lots of different creatures.
So, are you living there?
No.
Or you're hoping to live there?
I'm hoping to live there. I spend a lot of time there, and I do sleep there periodically.
Okay, and tell us, what's the sort of process of being able to live there legitimately?
Right. So the approach that I'm taking, there's lots
Yeah.
of approaches, and well, take your pick according to how much risk you want to have.
Yeah.
And so it's the approach that I'm pursuing will be an agricultural tied residence based on generating a livelihood from the land, plus proving a functional necessity to be there full time, based on the activities that I'm doing. So burning charcoal is something that will generate a functional necessity. Some aspects of growing vegetables in various environments will generate the same functional necessity. There's a security risk. I've had some things and equipment stolen from the site, and so, well, the tools aren't cheap, and beyond a certain point it doesn't just become viable. And I think there's also other aspects of maintaining the integrity of the land. I found deer snares set at various points within it's quite, because it's an interesting aspect of it, in that once I step into it, it feels like everything else just disappears. But it does partially abut the M4 on one side. There's the Elizabeth line on another edge, and Heathrow straight over the top. So it's not remote, and it's recognising that aspect of it, and that to keep people from just wandering around, as I not infrequently meet them doing, you have to do something about that. I think there's also the question of, would it be possible to live somewhere else and travel backwards and forwards? I certainly feel, from trying to observe it in as many different conditions as I can, that's you form a very different relationship when you do that, when you only see it at certain periods of the day. And I think many of the things which dictate what is most appropriate in a place come from the full understanding of engaging with it at all times, at all seasons, in all weathers. So I'm not sure whether the council will accept that as a valid reason, but I'm going to try and convince them.
I'm going to be silly now. It's a shame you can't claim a functional necessity to watch the wildlife 365 days in a year, which is very important. I'm being slightly silly, but that's an incredibly valuable thing to do.
Yeah, and it's
for yourself.
Yeah, it's, and having had the council, because I had to, the two structures that I've built so far, I've currently put in a retrospective application to retain them, but the council have visited me to discuss that, and they do, well, the planning officer who came to visit was, I suppose, necessarily impartial, but it's a question, and perhaps it's a foolish question and a naive question, to address the wider planning framework, but can there be room for individuality? And I suppose when you're looking at things on scale, perhaps the answer is obviously no. But for the time being, there's still an aspect of dealing with human beings, which means that, there is some chance.
I have dealt with quite a few planning officers, and some of them can be particularly friendly and will look at a slightly unusual angle and say fine, but it still doesn't really bother with them. But there can be variations in what
Yeah, I think looking at what other sites have had to go through, and I think one of the sites that I have learnt a lot from, which perhaps people here have had some dealings with, is Tinker's Bubble. And I mean, it took them 30 years, and for the majority of that time they were a fairly landmark project. So yeah, that's the landscape that we
the
work
size of your plot does give you more scope to do what you want to do. Very small plots for won't be seen as a viable long-term thing to do
No.
what you want to do. The bigger the site,
Yeah.
you have a much stronger case as time goes by.
Yeah.
So, more hypothetically, in reality, if you were to move out from where you were living at the moment
Mm-hmm.
to live on this 12-acre site,
Mm-hmm.
does that actually release more another place for somebody else to live?
I'm living for the most part with my parents at the moment,
Okay.
so not especially. It's but it's an interesting question, because if I look at the wider picture within it's South Bucks, if I look at and again you have to sort of accept the validity of housing requirement projections, but they're not meeting their housing requirement projections according to what's been laid out that they ought to build. So, but can that be taken into account in justifying building a new house? I don't know. I guess I have to ask that.
I suppose the other argument is, if you were to move out from your parents, you
Yeah.
either buy a property
Yeah.
or rent a property,
Yeah.
kind of depriving somebody else of that property.
Yeah.
So therefore you're creating,
Yeah. Yeah.
making available a property that you could possibly want yourself by having this property on your land.
Yeah, I think I suppose the precedent that the council are possibly mindful of creating is that could be used to justify building a house pretty much anywhere. If someone's living in a house and they happen to buy a bit of land, then they could free up a house and just build another house and then keep going. So yeah, I don't know where that leads.
I mean, you could develop your house on stilts as an example of coping with a changing environment, rising sea levels and rising river levels in the future. I mean, I'm trying to work on the extra elements of what could be a practical demonstration of South coping with climate change. I'm being half joking and half serious.
No, I think so. I think there is certainly an angle of that that could be valuable, and it's actually something the planning officer who came out to inspect the two structures I've built already. Her job title now actually includes the environmental responsibilities for the council. So the fact that environmental and planning responsibilities have been joined together.
Quite right.
Perhaps, but I don't know whether that's just because there aren't enough people to do all the rest of the jobs, and she's been given it all to deal with, and in fact she has to keep them separately, or whether the two are joined.
They are joined together on purpose, because we aren't going to be able to build anything in the future without having a pretty deep understanding of how the environment works to cope with the things that will happen because of climate change. So they are joined together.
I agree. I'm not sure whether the council appreciate.
There is an element of cost cutting. But they are trying to make their planning officers think about the environmental impact of developments in the future. Mitigation.
Did you come out because somebody had objected to what you were doing, or did you just want to regularise what you've done?
Someone reported what I'd done, and but they're perfectly entitled to do so.
Yeah.
And the proper procedure would have been, so I understand, because there are permitted development rights on the site of a certain size, so holdings of 5 hectares, which is 12.5 acres, there are certain permitted development rights for sites of that size, but you still need to notify the council before you start. If so, building structures under a certain size, so nothing that I've built is on permanent foundations either.
Yeah.
So they will, when removed, they would leave no permanent scar upon the landscape, and deliberately done in that fashion, both for planning reasons, but also in respect of what I leave behind when I go. And if someone comes to the land after me and decides that actually what I've done is completely inappropriate, they can just remove what I've done fairly straightforwardly. And even if I leave it and nothing else happens to it, it will return to the soil in fairly short order. So yeah, the fact that I've got 12.5 acres to play with gives me the permitted development rights, but yeah, it's going through the proper procedure, and when someone comes and visits you and wants to understand what's going on, your hand is a little bit forced.
Okay, so related to that, what happens if the local authority said, you know, we're going to zone this for housing, and suddenly you've got 12.5 acres worth gazillions, and you can sell it. Thank you very much. You can live, you know, with unimaginable wealth for the rest of your life.
I'd like to think I was capable of saying no. Well, I guess I don't know.
Because it would be worth a lot.
It would, and I think it's a question, because when I first started looking at how do I live there, I looked at it from a more, I suppose, conventional perspective. And if you look at it's a residential cul-de-sac that the land is accessed off of, and to close off the development line, essentially to just build on the end of the cul-de-sac, the planning officer would struggle to say no, and you could probably actually get away with 2 houses. And so one lived in the other.
Yeah.
But I knew, having met the people who live in what was my grandfather's house and the people who brew the beer on the other side, they really value having the field and having the green space and being able to wake up and look out the window and look across it. And I couldn't, on my own conscience, just say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let you have that view. So I thought of a different approach, and that was trying to limit anything that I did build to the area that already had some kind of structure on it, and keeping it as out of sight as possible, and keeping it as in keeping with the surrounding environment. But there is that question. But quite a few houses on it, you're right. Within my own lifetime, and with the resource I have at my disposal, I guess I'm fortunate enough that I don't need to say yes if someone offers me that money. That might not always be the case, and it might be an awful lot of money. But for the time being, I've got plenty to keep me occupied. Okay. You're paying me.
You say about donations if you're about to finish up.
Well, I was just gonna check. No more questions? No. Okay. So yeah, there is a donations. Well, I was going to say tray, but I believe there's also now electronic.
There's a machine and a plate.
A machine.
Well,
So
I'd like to say thank you to you, Matt, for that really